And it's that discomfort and dissonance about 27 that spoke to me. You know what? These things mostly don't make sense. And so I just wrote what I thought were the most important things, and it was a bit awkward, and that was kind of the point.
I'm Nathan Maharaj, and this is Kobo in Conversation. My guest is Laura Tamblyn Watts, founder and chief executive of CanAge, Canada's national seniors advocacy organization, and the author of a new book, Let's Talk About Aging Parents, a real-life guide to solving problems with 27 essential conversations. It's a book about the many hard things facing adults who know their aging parents need to make some decisions and probably some changes too, but they might not know where to start with either. Laura is very much a friend of the show. She's my friend. She is also the partner of my co-host, Michael. Laura Tamblyn Watts, welcome to Kobo.
I'm thrilled to be here.
Let's start by hearing you explain, who is this book for?
If you think about how many books we have on pregnancy, 9 months. Oh, it felt like 9 years when I was pregnant, but it was apparently only 9 months. If you think how many toddler books, 2 years, preschool books, maybe 2 years. And then you go and see, what's the book that gets me through from ages 35 to 75 for all of those relationships that I have of care, of support, of duty, and there really weren't any. And so this book is written for all of us in that 35 to 75-year-old age group.
And not just for us, it's for us to handle some stuff kind of coming at us. Can you sketch me a little bit of a picture of who this person is who's picking up your book and it's exactly right for them?
It's 3 a.m. You either haven't been to sleep yet or you're waking up. Your mom has called. Someone has broken into her house and taken her bananas. It's 3 a.m. You're up worrying about your dad because you had just been home and you're starting to see that he's forgetting things. It's 3 a.m. and you're pulling your hair out because you've got to get the kids to school, maybe the grandkids to school. And at the same time, you've got to come up with a strategy for how you're going to have a conversation about the fact that your mom needs to not be living alone in the middle of nowhere in her 3-floor house when she's falling in the middle of the night.
Did you, as you spoke about the books available for different life stages, did you survey the bookstore shelf first to see where the gap was for this book in particular, or were you honing the writing of this book around your vision of that reader who needs help?
So I run Canada's National Seniors Advocacy Organization. I'm a professor at the University of Toronto. I ran a Center of Excellence on aging issues before this. And I get the calls and the emails and the outreach just like everybody else saying, what am I supposed to do? They just got a diagnosis of macular degeneration. What the heck is macular degeneration? And I don't know if it's wet or dry or can they drive? I just got a diagnosis in my family of dementia. I don't know what it means. Am I supposed to take over? I don't know what to do. And I was just wanting to reach into a bookshelf and say, here's what to do. And more than that, here's how to have the conversation and still get invited to Sunday dinner or not have the door slammed in front of you. And I kept saying, there must be a book out there. And there wasn't. So finally, I wrote the book, and I just wanted it to be useful for people. Most people don't have the time to do the research and learn the science and figure the tricks of the trade. And so here it is, all in one place.
So I surveyed the bookshelf because I was looking at what does this book sit next to on the shelf, and what are its comp comparisons? Lifelong bookseller, you think about comps. And what struck me was the other books available in this field. They're either entirely about medical issues. Mm-hmm. There are several that speak to problems with dementia, challenges with caring for someone with dementia, and that was kind of it. Each of the readerships for those books, though, they're on the other side of a chasm that your book addresses, because if you're caring for your parent with dementia, you have decided to care for your parent with dementia. You have committed to it, and now you could use some hand putting it together. If it's all about medical issues, again, you've decided this is kind of going to be your problem, and you're going to tackle it. What I really loved about how you approached this was it was recognizing how many decisions come before action, and not even decisions, conversations. Can you tell me about that choice you made in writing it to speak about conversations, like you said, to continue to be invited to Sunday dinner?
I got so tired of people being bound behind this fictional norm of a 1950s Leave It to Beaver family. You've got mental health issues in your family? Congratulations, so does everyone. You've got addictions. You've got toxic parents. You've got 3-step parents. You've got half-step brothers twice removed. I mean, these are the modern relationships we have. Chances are you probably don't adore your parents all the time. You may have a terrible relation with one of them. You may not have parents, and this may be a great aunt or an uncle or even someone in a family of choice. What if you're in a queer relationship and you actually don't have biological family, but you've created this family of choice? And how do you even have that conversation with someone explaining what it is? So this book strips away, I hope, purposefully, those kind of ridiculous ideas of what is a family and allows air to flow into it. Do you feel guilty? Yeah, you probably do. Mm-hmm. Do you have worries about the fact that Susan from Calgary is swooping in to tell you what to do and swooping out again? Yeah, that's a real thing as well. Mm-hmm. So this book helps you, I think, do some of that pre-work yourself, and then as you need it at 3 a.m. on the book stand, you can just open up and look at that chapter, put a little pen to paper or fold the cover over and think, okay, there's something that can help me. I'll look at it in the morning.
Can you tell me about that comprehensiveness and where it came from? Was it an inbox full of messages? Did you have to imagine it? Was it endless revision?
It's everyone we know and my family too. Mm-hmm. I have a wonderfully diverse family. I've got 2 moms who are mothers-in-law. I've got the requirement to buy a bulk set of cards at Mother's Day because I need 6 cards to fully radiate the ones that are related to me. I have in our family, like every other family, that wide variety of flex and flow in relationships. Sometimes we do really well together. Sometimes we don't speak for 2 years. Sometimes it's just we don't think about it because it's sort of out of sight, out of mind. But then something happens, or you get a little insight into the fact that, I better start thinking about that. And so it's lived experience. In fact, the very first weekend that the book came out, so just a short time ago, in the middle of a meeting I was having, I looked at an email from my mother and said, I'm sorry, I have to go. My dad's had a health issue. And I picked up the car keys and drove to Niagara. And this is what everyone is dealing with.
Yeah, yeah. The 27 conversations in this book, they're grouped into 4 parts. Tell me about structuring it.
I think of this as how stuff comes to me, usually in my role at CanAge, in my 25 years of working in the field of aging. There's usually these points of conversation that come to you. And the first one is how we started out off. Does my parent need to move? And then there's this whole cluster of things. Mostly my answer is actually, No, probably not. I know there's a big impetus to moving across the country, bringing your mom to you. Almost always a terrible idea, by the way. We can get into that. It comes because people are worried about living at home alone or living with somebody that maybe they really can't take care of. So maybe dad has very heavy care needs and his husband is just not able to pick him up off the floor if he falls, right? And so all of those worries together start off in, I think, a very assuring place. You know what? There's lots of great things you can do to stay in your home, aging in place. New things that people think, oh, really? Oh, and then the stress level comes down. But the next one is, okay, what if you do need to downsize and do it? Okay, so there's lists, there's checklists, there's ways of doing it. What if we are the people, we being the broad circle around whatever we means, and I help you map out who the we might be, so it's not hopefully only you. What jobs need to be taken care of and how do we do those? And can we get community-based services? Do we have to pay? What's that? And then it takes you right through, okay, what if you do need to move into some type of seniors or retirement living? And then, of course, long-term care. So that arc is one of the first arcs that people confront. Then they take a deep breath and they think, okay, the next worry is usually around health. And so the next arc, that next pillar, tends to be around health issues. And dementia is a big one. But there's a whole chapter beforehand about everything else that affects cognitive impairment that isn't dementia. You know what? They may not have dementia. They may have an undiagnosed kidney, bladder, or urinary tract infection. And all they really need is some sulfa drugs and cranberry juice, right? And you can be better, right? And then the next whole thing tends to be about relationships, right? And then that last one is the everything else category.
And I will note, I'm grateful to the writers of Succession for raising the urinary tract infection connection to cognitive dysfunction thing, which I will admit, I Googled that while I was watching the episode, and then I was like, son of a gun. It's real. It happens.
It's hugely real. And then there's all of the other things that affect cognitive impairment too. Post-surgical delirium. So if you go to the surgical floor, and I did not that long ago, and I was having a conversation for other things, and I went to that weathered nurse who's kind of sitting around the corner, the one who's been there.
The one who knows.
The one who knows. And I said, hey, on this post-surgical floor, what percentage of post-surgical delirium's here? She looked around. She looked at her charts. She thought about it. She said, 70%. And what many people don't realize is that post-surgical delirium can last for up to 6 months.
Wow.
And so one of the things I talk to people about is I'm like, okay, your mom's not doing so great and she's starting to, has she had any surgery? First answer, no. Okay. When I say has she had any surgery, here's what I mean. And I go through it. Has she had any root canals? Has she had anything with regards to, I don't know, injections on her knee or something? Oh yeah, I guess that's true. Okay, so let's look at those things together. Meds reviews are huge. And so this is real science combined with real practicalities. You want to know not just the meds they're prescribed, but all the meds hiding around the house that they take, what I call those just-in-time or extra medications, and where to look for them. Above the stove. They're always above the stove, right? Or in the other nightside table. And then look as well for all the other things they're taking. Like cranberry juice is fine, but grapefruit juice will undo at a chemical level a lot of medications' effectiveness.
That one stunned me, that realization that, like grapefruit juice, like just don't. Just get it out of the house because at some point something's going to go wrong and it will be the grapefruit juice's fault, and it's just better not to have it.
And I love grapefruit juice. And so when we think about some of these things, it really needs to be done in a lighthearted way. And so that's one of the tenor and tone pieces that were really important to me. There's no old hand and a young hand talking about a caregiver's journey. There's no medical white coat, let me tell you all about these things. It's very much something that you can turn to as if it's your girlfriend. The front of the cover is 2 mugs, 2 armchairs ready for us to sit in it together, and we can kill ourselves laughing because we're going to talk about urinary incontinence, and frankly, the pee-pee jokes are funny. But it's also horrible. So how do you kind of laugh, but also get the right information at just-in-time times?
How did you settle on 27?
So the person who loves symmetry in me kind of hated it.
Yeah.
Right? I wanted 20, 25, or 30. And I don't know why. It's the same reason I like to have things equal on a room, right? You want a table on one side and the other side measured equally. And I thought, you know what? This is actually the number. And it's that discomfort and dissonance about 27 that spoke to me. You know what? These things mostly don't make sense. They don't have pretty rounded things in them. And so I just wrote what I thought were the most important things, and it was a bit awkward, and that was kind of the point.
I'm really curious about this process of arriving at 27 because I imagine, because they're written in the form of questions, that there was probably a lot of condensing the thousands of times you've heard variations on questions. So you had to make some decisions about, is this 17 different ways of asking the same question, or is it 13 ways of asking the same question, and 4 of these are something else entirely? Tell me about combing that through, like how setting that book up so you could write it.
So I probably had about 400 questions.
Yeah.
And so for me, I went with the big pillar themes, or those arcs first, right? The stuff about the house,
Yep.
the stuff about the body, the stuff about the relationships, and the everything else. And then within those, some things made the cut and got condensed, and some things are ready for the next book. The things that got condensed that I struggled with is there's a whole book on, let's talk about aging parents and where you live and how you get help, right? So there's a lot more to open that up as an accordion to do on an even more hands-on basis. There's a workbook that needs to be even more tactical and practical. The stuff about health, I also had to choose what are the biggest top of mind issues. And I fought for footnotes. Now that's the academic in me. And if you go to the back, the index is really fulsome. So if you're trying to figure out, and I'll just choose glaucoma, for instance, you can go to glaucoma in the back and then go to the section. It's going to be in health, and it's going to be in the section of eyes. Well, there's so many other things we could do around the health stuff that matters. The relationship things, oh, that's wonderful territory together. And that's a synthesis of many, many different aspects. There's lots to talk about when it comes to the flex and flow of relationships. And how do you put boundaries for yourself in the relationships with, and again, short form, your aging parents? And how do you keep those boundaries without losing your own mind? Because you can only do certain numbers of things. The everything else category, some stuff hit the floor, but again, it'll be on the next book.
How well read and conversant were you in the in this category of books, these books that come to people who are not medical professionals, they're not legal experts? The right book is probably one that's particular enough for them to, if they get stuck, go to the right kind of expert, but not not intimidating with its level of detail, and keeps them in it. Doesn't make them feel at any point that they're dropping out and that this maybe isn't for them.
When we're thinking about kind of what is the tenor and tone and flow that I was looking for it, this book hopefully will be the kind of what to expect when you're expecting book for this category. But actually, the flow and humor and just-in-time approach, plus what do I need to think about, and that sense of assurance, I was mostly inspired by the books that I found very useful for pregnancy and then into the early years, which was called A Girlfriend's Guide to Pregnancy.
Okay.
And it was dog-eared by the time I finished 9 months. And I read it again for the next kid as well. Because, well, partly because I couldn't remember anything anymore because I was pregnant or I had a new baby. I mean, partly it was that. But it was funny and embracing, but I was assured that they had done the synthesis of the right information. So readers here, you don't have to read that Lancet article on, I've done it, it's okay. Or I work within faculties and I work very, very closely with people who are trying to understand pain and pain management and opioids. You don't need to read the Swedish study on that. It's been done. If you want to, I invite you to the footnotes.
Yeah.
And part of what I will also do is enrich the website of Got Around the Book with sort of more deeper dives where people do want, right? There's always some people who want more information, more resources, and I really want to honor that. But when I was looking at this genre, the Girlfriend's Guide, that was the one that hit for me.
When was the last time you read that?
A long time
ago. A while.
So I'm 52. My kids are 20 turning 21, 21 who will be 22 in the fall, and 23. So my kids are back to back to back. And it's been a long time, but it sat with me because it was that comfort at 3 a.m. It sat with me because I knew that I would get practical advice. There was one I remember that said, okay, don't spend money on this. It's nonsense. It's being sold to you. Do actually invest some in that. And you'll see that in the book, particularly in the first chapter, where I help you try to navigate through the home. If you're going to spend, I don't know, $100, what's the best thing I can do? Buy a second banister for every stair that you have. Reduces fall risks by 56%. If you fall and break a hip in the first year, your chances of dying are 24%. If you make it to 2 years, your chances of dying are 40%. If you're a woman over 70, your chances of ever walking normally again, if you don't die, are about 20%. So put double banisters everywhere. And I go through the house at a really practical level and kind of, you can hold the book and walk through it. And you'll see kind of a $1 sign, $2 sign, $3.
Yeah.
And that was very much out of the restaurant guide, Michelin guide style.
The 27th chapter, which you saved for the very end, is, I think it's one we all know well, because we worry about it and we don't know how to tackle it. And it's, is it time for my parent to stop driving? Notably, it is in the, though it's in the, like, the miscellany drawer, as you described it, I saw the last part as not being so miscellaneous. It felt to me like it cohered around issues with bodies, medicine goes into bodies, and just a general, like, safety issue. So, and with driving, it's public as well as personal. Tell me about parents, older folks, and driving.
Yeah. So it's the last chapter for a reason, because if it's not the first chapter, it needs to be the last chapter. It's really easy to find in the book.
Right.
So that's the very chapter 27, folks. It's the one about driving, right? And it's one of the other most important questions. So can they stay at home and when can they stop driving? Those are literally, you can open up the front or you can open up the back and you get what you want. So it was quite purposeful to put it as the very last chapter. So there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is this. Actually, older drivers are pretty safe. Even older drivers who are a bit wonky, and you know what I mean when I say that, they're still pretty safe. Older female drivers are more safe than older male drivers because they tend to do what we call self-limiting. So your mom may decide that she's only going to drive during the day. Your mom may decide not to do highways. Your mom may decide that she's essentially going to drive when it's fair weather out. If you have a father or a father figure, and again, I'm using these terms very, very broadly and extremely inclusively, there is a little bit of machismo usually around the driving. And this is particularly true of our older generations. I think probably less so now, actually, as driving is in some ways less important than it used to be. But getting that license is a it's a ticket to ride.
Yeah.
It's a ticket to ride. And one of the pieces that's also important is if you are in a couple, it's quite common that one person is the driver by default, right? Mom stops driving, dad will still drive on the highways. That's how they get to the cottage. Those really pragmatic pieces. Now, in the chapter, there's a bunch of red flags. Look at the car. Look at this. Look at that. Be in the car with the person. Start paying attention. Those are important. And then don't assume, this is the theme of the book, don't assume anyone's going to do it for you.
Yeah.
If you think that the doctor is going to spontaneously take away the keys, let me tell you, it's probably not going to happen. If you beg on your knees, and if they have a doctor, 1 in 10 Canadians do not, maybe, but the general practitioners don't want to do it because it means that people get mad at them and they never come back.
Yeah, I mean, if they can leave, because they have just taken someone's license who probably drove there. So it's just the logistic. None of the puzzle works for expecting the doctor to do this.
It doesn't. And so there's a bunch of different strategies around it that I give, and literally scripting to start thinking about it. I'll never forget my pediatrician. It's a true story. Wonderful woman, pioneering, absolutely an intellect. And she drove into the front glass panel of our fish store with, and you can only just imagine, fish and lobsters and like clams and everything raining down on her giant car. She went straight into it, took all the tanks out, got out of the car and ordered supper. That's a rarity, but we do need to make sure because she was lucky not to have killed someone that day.
Yeah, yeah. One of the really useful tactics you offer throughout, it's less like a single tip and much more like an approach, although you do specifically come up with it with retirement homes. But you talk about the value of a trial period. That it's what I thought was so helpful about that was it was correctly identifying what it is we're trying to do right here, and what it is we're trying to do is often it's often not making the change. It's finding out which change we would like to make and which of our options we'd like to settle on. Talk to me a little bit about the value of that trial period, of trying stuff out.
I think about the shock of change as the enemy to positive aging. So when we get older, transitions can be harder. And while I never ever make comparisons between young children and aging parents, because it's actually not true and it's not fair. I had one of those kids that hated transitions, just hated it. Well, you'd have a temper tantrum that would last for hours. Now, is that going to happen to your aging parent? No, but you really may have the door slammed upon you, and you may actually burn up your relationship. This is one of those things when change is too sudden and it's not being prefaced by good thinking and respectful conversations, all of which we have a very hard time doing when we go home and actually turn into a miscreant 16-year-old, right, who they still remember because that's the last time that you probably lived at home. So think about two pots, a hot pot and a cold pot, in science class in grade 3, right? What you want to do is add some of each to the middle and kind of warm things up. The tactical and practical experience of feeling what something is like and taking a bit of time cannot be overstated. What works poorly is a shock change. And we see people who do a big change and move and then they decline very rapidly. And if they've got a partner, partner usually declines rapidly too. So here's an example. If you are, in fact, Susan from Calgary, I don't know why I'm picking on Calgary or people named Susan, and you're thinking, you know what, Mom, you live across the country and you really are living all by yourself and your partner has passed away and I'm really worried. You're getting socially isolated and we should talk about that because that is the killer. I think you should move here. Should she move there right now? No. Probably not, unless Mom had used to live in Calgary and knows Calgary and has relationships, or wherever in the world we're talking. So if you're thinking about them spending some time, maybe what you say is, wouldn't it be great if you could come for March break or part of the summer? Or, you know what, my neighbor really needs some dog sitting. Would you ever consider doing a favor and staying at her house for 3 weeks? Where relationships explode is when you have someone come, they don't know the area, they're feeling vulnerable, they're not feeling powerful, they're disoriented. And for readers who, like me, navigate based on coffee shop and shoe stores and that nice big tree in the corner, you can't navigate yourself around anymore. And then you become more isolated. And often then you are slammed into a role of taking care of kids. Guess what? Here's the thing. Most parents do not want to live with their adult children.
Yeah.
It's a myth. Mostly they would like to be around and have good, positive relationships. But if they ever want to live with somebody, they don't want to live with their kids mostly. They might want to live like Golden Girls style with their friends. So part of what the book also talks about is how do you find ways to warm that pot in the middle with the hot and cold so nothing is a shock to the system.
I imagine what also mitigates that shock is that if you've had the trial period, then the decision to go further or back up and do something different, the autonomy rests with the person.
That's
the
it.
changes happen. Change is not happening to them. They are part of making change.
Absolutely. Let me give you an example. There's a wonderful, brilliant 95-year-old man who lives in a community that I'm engaged in a rural community. He gets really supported by family and friends in this little community around, but frankly, they need a break. And so he went back to the urban city that he used to live in the East Coast and spent 2 weeks at essentially a really lovely retirement residence, but got some care and support. Hated it. Swore he'd never go back. He's there right now for a month because he made the decision after saying it was the worst thing and he would never ever go back again. He'd actually made some relationships there and he remembered that he could go and visit his colleague that he used to work with. He also was aware that his kids needed a bit of a break and that they wanted to go on holiday. So now he has this place that he can go to. Many people don't realize many long-term care homes will have short period respite care services attached to them. So even if they need heavy care, they can kind of get used to it and build some community. Same if you were trying to think about living with somebody else. So, maybe you do want to see what it feels like if you have granny flat downstairs. Try it out a little bit over a holiday or the summer, or preferably not a time where you're trying to do a million other things. Just test it out and then they can make the choice whether they like it, don't like it, and they can imagine themselves in that environment.
And it could even be a yes, but let's change these things and let's work on that. And they, these are the things that have to be changed before I move in, and these are the things we'll just work on through the first couple of years. That's
it. And having those regular touch points are really important. I think people seem, when I've looked at other books before, that folks have these incredibly high-level PhD skill sets about conflict, and most people actually don't. They hate conflict and they avoid conflict, and then it blows up or something is then very resentful. So part of what the book does is it guides how to do check-ins without it being weird.
Yeah. One of the tips I really like, and it's about where you guide the reader through how to check some stuff out. What it touches on is what it brought up for me was how we have this capacity to adapt to our parents. It's what we do. Because we are children to them. Whatever the present reality of them is, we keep resetting normal. And we'll even call something a new normal, maybe if it feels like a bit of a jump, but we'll still call it normal. And there's a tip you give about how to recognize when it's time to make some changes, when maybe you're setting normal in a place where normal doesn't belong, and you can kind of start that conversation. Tell me about about stuff not working.
When we think about stuff not working, I start thinking about the person first, then their relationships, and then their environment.
Yeah.
In the academic world, we call that an ecological model. We can continue on and talk about systems and whatever, but we're at the center. And again, you don't have to be an academic and work on the ecological model. What you can say is, how is that person doing right now? That's often where you're starting to see hints of things. And the book helps to raise the fact that they're acting in a way which maybe as individual little trails or small signals you might think is puzzling, but not connect it to, oh, this is actually part of a broader issue. So here's an example. You go to the house and you hear things like, oh, don't use that toilet. That toilet's not working right now. You think, what? Yeah, we just go outside, or we just do the other thing, or I just use the outside shower. Okay, well, we've all certainly had home ownership or rental challenges, and I actually I don't sleep in that bed anymore. I don't sleep in my bedroom anymore. And you don't hear them say that until you've done 3 levels of inquiry first. You're in the living room, you're seeing that big recliner, and by that recliner are a bunch of the things that they use at night, like their dentures or things that typically would be by the bedside. And then you realize that they're actually sleeping in the living room. And then you have to think to yourself, why are you sleeping in the living room? Oh, maybe it's because I need to be close to the bathroom for continence. Or maybe it's because my arthritis is so painful I can't get up in the night. And it's these kind of flags about the person that individually might just make you go, that can help transmute it into understanding there's something wrong with the individual human being. The next thing is relationships. So if they are having some urge incontinence, and anyone who's ever had kids as a woman will be able to tell you that these are things we don't talk about but are hugely important. They may not go to the movies anymore. You're thinking, well, why aren't you going to the movies? They may be worried that they can't actually make it to the bathroom. Okay, well, all of the period underwear that we advertise now for young women, yeah, you can use that too. You don't have to. So these tricks of the trade. And what happens is when they stop going to bridge or stop going to the activities that they're doing, softball games, you start putting it together that they're limiting themselves and becoming very socially isolated. And none of those things is sat down over a cup of coffee where they lean in and say to you, you know what, Laura? I've had some regular urge incontinence, and I'm very worried about fecal incontinence, and for that reason, I've given up most of my activities, and I'm now also sleeping and living, for that matter, in my living room. No. You're Sherlock Holmes. You got to look for the clues.
Yeah. You come right out, even with tips on how to coordinate action within a family, as we spoke about the many different ways families function or don't. None of your advice is to swoop in and take charge. In fact, you explicitly say, like, this isn't work. Don't put on work face. Work face won't work. You lay out point by point how to call the family meeting, how to conduct it, what can be expected to be accomplished. That it may not be one meeting. There are things like primer meetings. Tell me about gaining that tactical wisdom.
I think it's always helpful if you're working off of a worksheet where one person doesn't have to have all of the power and the knowledge. And so one of the things I wanted was for people to be able to say, oh, that's the book that's going to help me at 3 a.m. or when I'm sitting in traffic and my brain is spinning and I've got to go run to take care of mom, but somehow I'm also supposed to pick up the kids and get that presentation done by end of day, right? And so if you have some person, then often maybe it's the older child or it's the one that lives close by, they start becoming the knowledge keeper and then start getting a bit more, I know all of these things, you don't know those things, right? And then those dynamics come in back to you chop the head off my Barbie, which he totally did. My brother totally chopped the head off, right? These are live questions that come up. And if you have something that's neutral third party, that can help you walk through it, then those power dynamics can settle. You just say, you know what, go to chapter whatever, 3. There's a list there. Okay, if you can have a look at that ahead of time, just check off things that you think you can do and things that maybe you can't do. That's what I wanted for the book. What I did not expect was this. I didn't expect people in their 80s and 90s to be buying copies for all of their children and grandchildren because they wanted things like, don't swoop in and tell me what to do, or, yeah, I can go to Vegas, it's not your choice, or, I don't know how to have these uncomfortable conversations, but if you read it, I can then refer to it while not quite making eye contact with you. And that was an unexpected benefit.
Kind of like Robert's Rules of Orders.
Exactly. Yeah. It's exactly Robert. One of the things that's really important to know is this is age and stage. Nobody, and again, I never, ever equate older adults and small children, but people who are interacting with folks who have different needs. Can you imagine if I said, okay, it's potty training time, child number 1. I'm going to tell you to do it. I'm going to show you where the toilet is. Now you're done. Great. I'm going to leave back to wherever and you're sorted out.
Yeah.
Yeah. That actually doesn't work. And so it's maybe a bit of cajoling, or it's a bit of bribery, or it's a bit of showing, or it's a bit of humility and understanding that life is a process. It's not a job or task.
Yeah. Yeah. On the subject of structured conversations and interactions, I thought there was a really, really handy piece of advice that you called 3 words and you're in. Can you tell me about 3 words and you're in?
It's so important to get some type of commitment. Now, I'm not, of the groovy, spiritual wellnessy person. Okay. And I have people in my family who really are, and they're really good at that. But what I would say is there needs to be a shift in your mentality when you're coming to this, and you actually do need to be present. You can't be on your email. You can't be worried about a million other things. You need to create a bit of common space. And so if you're opening up a conversation, this is a trick from an organization I belong to called Young Presidents Organization. You say how you're feeling. And so I would say that during this podcast, I am feeling delighted. Mm-hmm. I am feeling energized, and I'm feeling impressed, and I'm in. And that means I'm in the conversation. But what most people will say things like, okay, we're coming together for this meeting about dad and driving. I'm feeling worried. I'm feeling desperate, and I'm also feeling happy, and I'm in. I'm happy because of all these things. It allows people to baseline what you're coming to that conversation with and be a little bit open with each other, because you're living your life and you can live in many colors and contradictory states at the same time. Mm-hmm. Once you say you're in, that means you're focused on the conversation. At the end of it, it allows a bit of a temperature check. You can say, okay, end of the conversation. We've been talking about the driving. I feel relieved. I feel, concerned, and I feel uplifted, and I'm out. And so we have a sense that I'm not completely lost. I've rejuvenated a conversation, but the conversation's over now, and I have the permission to go back and try to figure out how to get that presentation deck for tomorrow. And all the people around the table aren't going to be saying to me, but don't we need to continue? No, we're in and we're out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What I thought it was so useful for was to get those feelings spoken aloud, makes them take up less space.
Yes.
And I think a lot of the friction, especially in families, is feelings not going acknowledged, not going spoken, but a burning need for them to be recognized. And just having that as part of the agenda of everyone get vulnerable, everyone just say what they need. We're not asking you for a monologue, like literally 3 words, just feeling words, and it's short enough that we really can't direct it. Like, I mean, if you're going to say, I feel resentful, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe that needs to be more of a conversation. But yeah, it was, I liked how it just kind of cools the room a little bit before you get down to business.
And allows you to be real people. Mm-hmm. Again, it stops that idea, which many of us have, of I'm supposed to be the perfect daughter, or mm-hmm. I'm supposed to be the ideal niece, or I'm supposed to be that person who is in a loving family, but actually I can't stand my stepfather. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of here and I'm kind of not here because he abused me when I was 13, but you really love him and you had a great relationship. So I could say something like, I feel conflicted. Yeah. I feel anxious, but I feel willing. Yeah. And I'm in. Well, that you've just told me a whole story. Mm-hmm. If those parking lot issues come up, you can also pay attention that these are not one-way relationships. So I may be saying something, you're like, oh, okay. You know what's happening right now is you're re-experiencing trauma. And maybe we need to pay attention to the fact that maybe you shouldn't be part of this conversation right now. Mm-hmm. Maybe this is actually really a traumatic thing for you, and your mm-hmm. mental well-being is more important to me than trying to figure out what to do about dad's glaucoma.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Another tip, because I'm just calling it my favorite tips now. But it's because this one is about furniture, and that you need easy storage. You need things that people can operate. And I think we can all see that it's attached to like the stuff not working. Is, why are the pots out on the counter? Because I can't reach the top cupboard, and that's where they've been going. So, and I can't empty out the bottom cupboard because stuff is too far back or whatever. So you talk about keeping clutter, tripping hazards to a minimum, and that can be facilitated by just having the right kind of storage. But the tip you offer is, like, if you're not finding it in the main section, like, go to the kids section. And we've been talking a lot about that. There's so much that addresses how to deal with children, to the point that capitalism has even turned around and said, here, buy these things. You have children, here, consume. We don't seem to have our heads wrapped around that we need different stuff for old people, and we're just kind of winging it with help. Do you see any change coming with respect to, like, let's call it a market response to a tidal wave of needs?
Just starting. Astounding that I'm just saying that in 2024.
Yeah.
Just starting. So our organization, CanAge, has a very strong relationship with our sister organization in the United States called the AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons, although they're just called AARP now because most people are not retired. So,
Speaking of capitalism,
what they've done is they've created essentially a branding exercise, but it's a vetting branding exercise with a chain. And so you can go into places and they'll have kind of a seal of approval or AARP recommended and so on. I actually think it's genius, because at least if I'm looking at which tiles to buy for my bathroom, if there's a one that says age inclusive, age friendly, or AARP or wherever else, I know that they've done a ton of research to make sure it's non-slip and grip. We are not doing much of it. And part of it is because people who come into marketing and branding, I think, have very poor sense of who their actual market and people who have money are. And that is a piece that we really need to confront. If you start thinking about people who are like 60, 70, and so on, everyone is going to get there. Plus, everyone has those people in their lives, and we don't serve the market well.
It also occurred to me reading the book that, people are. I saw a news story the other day that was trying to, rage farm something about, boomers not selling their houses, and I mean, the obvious thing to me as a middle-aged person, in the teeth of this housing crisis is like, well, no, where would they downsize to? The housing. A starter home and an appropriate target for downsizing to, they're kind of the same object, and they're not there. We might have seen this housing crisis coming a lot earlier if we were having like mature conversations about the needs of aging people.
And this is it. What we love to do is blame people for things, but what we don't think about the fact is actually we created this problem ourselves. So in most countries, there are credits if you own a house. Even if you, like most people, own the house with a bank, but you own the house. I can defer property taxes at a certain ages, but I can't defer condo fees. I can defer or get credits for different kinds of changes to the house, but I can't make an apartment building make it more accessible for me. You don't qualify for almost anything unless you're a homeowner. And yeah, okay, the roof might be leaky and so on, but I'll just move to the other part of the house. Whereas you can't say that anywhere else. Also, that piece about location and interstitial niching with community is so important for mental well-being, restrains against dementia. Our social networks are in those areas. So literally, if we were going to move, and even if you could find a place that you could afford, and renting is usually more expensive than home ownership at that point, and you can defer some expenses otherwise. If you can find a place and it happened to be accessible, which it assuredly is not going to be, the fact is you don't know anyone there.
Yeah.
And because we have not pushed adequately, wouldn't have been nice about 40 years ago, but I'll take last Wednesday to do things like make doors not narrow, make door frames wider, and not just for people with some physical disabilities, but for everyone, then mom could probably move more to an apartment building. But those apartment buildings that have elevator operators, which by the way is a whole nother conversation, because elevators break and then people can't get to their apartments or can't get out of their apartments. We can do a lot around age inclusive and multi-generational housing. There's tons and tons of things that we know how to do well, but we actually have to start promoting them, because otherwise nobody can afford to leave the house that they already own or are in, as they say, co-ownership with a financial institution.
Yeah.
And 65% of the people who are in rural communities are older, and we have very few strategies for aging outside of a major city center.
Is there a corner you think you might be able to see around now? Is there, like, what's the, not asking you to kind of predict the future, but more like a thing that worries you that not enough people are yet worrying about, but you are dead certain we're about to panic in like 10, 15 years?
Oh, the healthcare system doesn't work for us. I mean, and I mean, I am a proud Canadian. I pay my taxes. I take a deep gulp and pay my taxes and say, good, this is going to the social well-being.
Yep.
But if you think it's actually going to take care of your aging, take a deep breath. Our healthcare system in Canada, and for listeners across the world, they'll know that their healthcare systems are not set up much differently unless you happen to be in one of the Nordic countries. We designed our healthcare systems for acute care, which is great. We're good at it. You break a leg, no problem. You go in, they patch you right on up, and you get out. We're pretty good at it. We're not bad about things like heart attacks or strokes. Urgent things occur, we apply support. We designed our healthcare system in Canada when the average age of death was 76. Mm-hmm. We designed our financial pension system when the average age of death was 67. So the expectation was that you would work until 65, have 2 years of, I don't know, going to the cottage, playing golf, having a nice time, and then die immediately of a heart attack and drop dead and be absolutely out of the picture.
Yeah.
And that's not what happens. Since the healthcare system was reformed in the 87, and so the average age of death was 76, and this is for this country in Canada, not that different for other countries as well. The top 10 things that you died from are all now chronic conditions. So the things that the healthcare system was designed to manage an emergency that then you would die from are now things we live with. Mm-hmm. And we're going to live with on average between 20 and 30 more years. So this means we have to do it ourselves, which is okay, because the book was written to help you figure out what is it that you need to save for, where do you spend, how do you strategize, but don't assume that aging is free in this or any other country, because it is not.
Mm-hmm. Laura, thank you for joining us.
This has been the most fun that I have had in a long time, and I hope this book helps.
I have been speaking with Laura Tamblyn Watts, author of Let's Talk About Aging Parents, a real-life guide to solving problems with 27 essential conversations. Find it at our episode archive, kobo.com/conversation, or you can click through the show notes. It's easy. Subscribe in your podcast player to catch every episode, and if you enjoyed this one, please share it with somebody who you might need to have one of these 27 conversations with. Kobo in Conversation is produced, hosted, and edited, this time around by me, Nathan Maharaj. Thank you for listening.